Please welcome to the stage Dr. Farida Griffith, Managing Director for the Wharton Coalition for Equity and Opportunity at the Wharton School, and Dr. Amy Castro, co-founder of the Center for Guaranteed Income Research and an associate professor, School of Social Policy and Practice at the University of Pennsylvania. They'll be in conversation with Devin Cotton, founder and CEO of Universal Basic Employment and Opportunity.
Thank you, everyone, and I'm so excited to have this conversation. I do want to take a moment to thank Larry and Roxanne for just having us here. I couldn't think of a better place to spend our Friday afternoon, and I think this conversation today, in terms of thinking about a human rights economy, is going to be really important. So can we just start off with just thanking Roxanne and Larry. It is my pleasure to be in conversation with Amy and Devin. We've had a really great time getting to know each other and just learning a bit more about the programs that they're working on, both close to home as well as afar, but thinking about it as it relates to the United States. Oh, this is going in and out. So without further ado, I spent a little bit of time in Ohio, a little over a decade, and I think the work that Devin is doing and really driving as we look at the universal basic economy and employment and thinking about the ways in which that could work. What drove you to do this work? Why is this work important? How can we learn in Philadelphia as we think about employment as a way to impact the economy and to impact the poverty?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I've really enjoyed my 25 hours here in Philadelphia. Great city. As a Browns fan, it's hard for me to say go Birds, but big win for you all. So go Birds.
Be careful.
Yeah.
Don't jinx us, please.
I know, sorry about that. But our mission at UBE is to demonstrate that a federal jobs guarantee policy can eliminate poverty and be a stop payment on its many symptoms. We do this by subsidizing the salary and employment for 100 under and unemployed Clevelanders for 3 years at $50,000 to prove that a jobs guarantee policy is a simultaneous investment in people, place, and business. On a very practical level, that imagines a world where a single mother can walk down the street and go to work at her Main Street business, a church, a child care center, a grocery store, and walk back up the street to that she owns because her $50,000 salary positions her to use the private sector banking tools of a credit card, mortgage, and car loan. It gives her the agency to live in a neighborhood of choice because now the private sector sees her and her neighbors as customers to solve the symptoms of poverty. So she has the ability to buy groceries locally. They can see and run the income scans that say, hey, everyone around here can pay $49.99 a month for internet, so we can solve the symptoms of digital divide. What we're doing is shifting government investment from a reactive responses to a proactive solution that eliminates poverty as well as dignifies historically low wage work, reinvigorates a local tax base, closes the black-white wealth gap, and restores dignity and agency back to the nearly 41 million Americans that live in poverty.
Okay, thank you. So for building off the work that Devin has been doing, Amy, can you speak? First, I want to say, we're both at Penn. We really have gotten to know each other the last couple of days. We're going to continue this conversation even after this is over. So thank you for this opportunity to build this relationship and thinking about ways in which we can partner. So building off of the work that Devin is doing, I want you to talk a bit more about, you've done some work in Stockton, California, you've done some work in Los Angeles, Newark, Oakland, these different programs as we look at the cash transfer. And so what are some of those key takeaways from the programs? Are there learning opportunities or lessons learned from one program to another? And how can we think about ways in which we can use those takeaways to really impact this kind of what we look at as a human rights economy?
Yeah, and first, I just have to say, thank you so much for leading with human rights. You know, we talk about the economy as though it's this mythical thing that's just given, and the economy we have is a result of choices. You know, budgets are moral documents. We did not get here by accident. The economy did not just drop us here. in a place where we have growing income and wealth inequality. So I just want to start out by saying that and kind of laying that groundwork. So what we specifically study is guaranteed income, and guaranteed income is unconditional cash, no strings attached. You don't have to do anything to receive it. There are no work requirements. The logic of unconditional cash is that you receive it simply because you are human, because you have breath, because you have life. And note, we're tying that to humanity, not to citizenship, not to country of origin, but the fact that you are a human being. And so the logic behind it is really saying there is a floor that we ought not let people fall beneath simply because they're alive. And on the flip side, the way the economy is set up is such that, we only see people as deserving or worthy based on how they perform in the market. Okay. And when we do that, we lock out entire populations out of the economy, but we also leave human potential off the table, which is really, frankly, makes absolutely no sense, right? So if we want to lean into innovation, we need everybody at the table. So we started first in Stockton, providing $500 a month, every month for 2 years on a prepaid debit card. And there are many findings out of that, but I'll hold off for just a minute because I know you're going to ask a couple more questions.
We planned this. So building off of what you just talked about, I want to, if we can delve and think a little bit about this intersectionality of race and gender. So we've been talking a lot about this, the cash transfer and the no strings attached associated with the program. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit about this intersection where we know that particularly for Black women, as we look at income, some of them are high income earners, but the way in which they're able to save, there's a disconnect, right? And in terms of the wealth, there's also a disconnect in terms of the amount of wealth. And so I'm wondering if you could speak in terms of that intersectionality. What are some of the ways in which the program is working with some of those existing social security nets? And then what are the ways in which we can think about how can we go above and beyond with that connection between income and the wealth gap?
Yeah, so first I should say that, guaranteed income is addressing income inequality, not wealth inequality. So I wouldn't presume to think that $500 a month or even $1,000 a month for 1 year or 2 years is going to undo hundreds of years of economic marginalization, right? What we're doing is we're providing a way for families to sort of stabilize income volatility, which we know is a failure of capitalism that shows up in the body. It shows up in the form of higher anxiety, higher rates of depression. We know that when we smooth that income volatility with the provision of unconditional cash, it frees people up to have agency. And so when we think about, particularly low-income women and women of color, these are folks who, we talk about them as though they're in isolation, right? But in reality, they're often the strongest members of a financially fragile network. And so when we are stabilizing the household of one parent, or one woman, it's not just her. It's also stabilizing housing so that people have a place to go. So they're holding up communities, they're holding up their entire network in ways that we often miss. And there is no one on earth that is more savvy at budgeting than a low-income mom.
Yeah. We should clap to that.
Clap for them, not for me.
No, to that.
Yes.
Motion, yes. If we look at the program that you're running, or you're hoping to launch, Devin, it's $50,000 to 100 workers. And so is $50,000 enough? How did you arrive at that number? What can we think about, what may be missing from, if it was a utopia and we were given a different number, would you change that number? Let's talk a little bit about the numbers and kind of why did you arrive at that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. As Amy outlined, a salary is meant to do something. It has to show up in the world in a way that allows people to move and do and buy and acquire and participate in our economy. So where do we get the $50,000 number from? Our friends at the Atlanta Federal Reserve have done an amazing job of mapping out what the benefit cliff looks like. And so in their portal, in their dashboard, it shows in every county in the country what number you would need to earn to bridge past the use of all social safety net benefits. Mm-hmm. And so that number in Cuyahoga County is $50,000 for a single head of household with 2 kids. Mm-hmm. That same number here in Philadelphia County is $83,000 for a single head of household with 2 kids. And so what we're building up is the autonomous wage. I'm not going to play in the living wage game and what is the minimum wage game. So what we're calling is an autonomous wage, a wage that bridges you past the use of most social safety net benefits. We're going to keep that child care one in place because whether you make make $20,000 or $120,000 childcare is really, really expensive. It allows you to have your income and your neighbor's income be recognized by the private sector so that they can become in changing the way your neighborhood and makes it a neighborhood of choice. And if we were to look in a very practical sense, if we were to make any neighborhood in Cleveland to have a median income of $50,000, you would walk down the street and you would look at the main street and you say, wow, this is a nice place I want to live. This is a place where there's strong home ownership. This is a place where there's strong community cohesion. So when we look at the numbers in a practical sense, and I imagine the same thing here in Philadelphia County, in the city of Philadelphia, if there was any single neighborhood where there was an $83,000 median income, you'd be like, oh, I'd like to hang out there for a while.
Yeah, I think part of this, the two programs, this is the question that I kind of want us to think about. Part of these programs, they are meant to help, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all, and I think I appreciate you doing the research and thinking about the ways in which the $50,000 may not work, may not be able to apply to the context of Philadelphia. But I want to think about the two programs. We have the Universal Basic Employment Program, and then we have the Guaranteed Income Program. One of them requires work for the program, and the other one, there's no strings attached. So I'm sure on both ends of the programs, people have been critical, right? So can we talk about what are some of the noise that you've heard in terms around what the challenges those programs face, as well as how do we think about this notion of looking at economic participation and dignity? Like you're contributing to or providing particular resources to individuals who have not received those in the past. So what is that connection and what does that mean for the programs to continue on?
Yeah, we know that an earned income is the gold standard of agency in our country. And we also know that through our human-centered design process, where we brought in 40 of the most proximate voices to poverty, so we brought in 20 business owners and 20 Black women to give us feedback on how we design this, is that everyone wants the autonomy to be the because of and writing their own story. No one wants to you go through the SNAP process or a housing choice process where you have to recertify every 6 months or every year and tell the government X, Y, and Z. We don't have to do that with our incomes, but for some odd reason, we're really good at pocket watching poor people.
Yes.
So because of that and our goals around agency, we've decided to focus so much on an earned income. And additionally, our goal is to create a bipartisan solution. And so we understand where, the spectrum lies in our country. So we're really good at wrapping and tying things, even public benefits, to work of that, hey, if you receive SNAP after so many months or so many weeks, you have to begin going to a training program or something like that. So we want to use the existing framework, the existing affinity that our government has to dignify historically low wage work and dignify folks that live in poverty by way of work.
First, I just have to say that is so exciting.
Yeah.
It's funny because the framing sometimes sounds a little bit similar in terms of language. People can sometimes get the impression that it's an either or, and it's not. It's a both and figuring out what works best based on community, right? So similar to what you were just saying, a guaranteed income is designed to work alongside the safety net. It's not in place of it. So we're not saying axe the entire safety net and then just provide everybody with $1,000 a month. Spoiler alert: the math doesn't work on that. If you've got a voucher, SNAP, Medicaid, Medicare, come on. Yeah. That does not equal $1,000 a month. If we were to wipe out the safety net tomorrow and replace it with a UBI, we would immediately plunge families into poverty without question. So it's designed to work alongside that, but it's also designed to work alongside the economy. It's designed to work alongside the employment sector, but we know that the employment sector doesn't work for everybody, primarily because we've been locking people out of upward mobility for generations, and they may not be prepared for the market, or the market, more importantly, is not prepared for them. So when we look at sort of our data on unemployment, I should back up by saying your question was, what are some of the oppositions that you receive? Where would you like me to start? Because that thing is ticking down. I only have so many minutes.
Give us your top three.
My top three. Okay, so not from the internet trolls. I'll give you the top one. The top one is this assumption that if you provide people with cash, no strings attached, they're going to quit their jobs en masse. Now, if anybody in the room or anybody anywhere can find a way to live on $500 a month anywhere in the United States, let me know.
Please. Yeah.
That would be fabulous. I'm sure I can convince my dean to let me work remotely. I would love to figure that out and just kind of slowly back off from Penn, right? But no, that doesn't That doesn't even flies in the face of logic, right? But that's what people assume. And we assume that because we attach moral worth based on how people perform in the economy, rather than saying we attach worth to you because you're my fellow neighbor, right? That should be the starting point. Now, speaking about the data, what's really interesting is that we do have some effects on employment. They're mixed in some cases. But by and large, what we saw in Stockton was that providing people with $500 a month, no strings attached, actually led to an increase in more full-time employment, more secure employment, right? So what happens is that when you're living in scarcity, when you are running around trying to recertify your benefits, working 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, while also raising a family, we know that financial scarcity creates time scarcity. And that time scarcity, it literally impacts the mind. It impacts people's ability to set decisions for themselves, to create a pathway for the future. And so what we've seen with unconditional cash is that it provides this floor that gives people the chance to complete an internship, complete training for a job, to actually take a shift off of work and apply for a new job. So if you're living paycheck to paycheck, just picture this for a minute. You know, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you have to actually skip work to apply for a job that you don't know you're going to get. That skipped shift can lead to missed rent, right? So you're literally walking that tight line of eviction. So guaranteed income is designed to kind of fill in that stopgap to let people determine for themselves how they want agency to show up for them in their own lives. And there has been, I should say, one study where we have seen a slight reduction in work, which I find is pretty exciting, to be honest with you. So our colleagues at Open Research just recently released some data this summer showing that people receiving unconditional cash reduced their labor by about 1.3 to 1.4 hours per week. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wish it was slightly higher, maybe, right?
Yeah.
People need that time to take care of themselves and take care of their families.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm also, both of you are talking in relationship to the data. I think the data really do, in terms of the focus group, you didn't call it focus group, but my sociology mind said that was a focus group that you did. And then when you're talking about the data in the different studies, I will also be wondering, what were they doing in those 1.3 hours? And you talked a bit about that. And so the data impact and the data are driving what the work that you're doing. So I'm happy to hear that in this particular case. Amy, you've done some work in about 30 different cash transfer studies. Can you talk a bit about the different programs, and particularly lessons learned that we could apply in the context of Philadelphia? How could policymakers use this information to impact policy and hopefully bring about some of these changes within the guaranteed income within Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it's so straightforward. Poverty, by definition, is lack of cash, right? So if we provide people with unconditional cash, we're going to see stability in the household. So some of the findings that we've seen that I think are immediately applicable to my home city is we've seen decreases in anxiety and depression with the provision of unconditional cash. That is without providing therapy. Reason being, the reason we saw increases in mental health and well-being is because that is the constant drip of stress when you cannot afford to pay rent. So that anxiety, that economic strain shows up in the body as poor public health indicators. And when we smooth that, when we deal with that, we then open up opportunities for people to reimagine what they want their life to look like. Recently in the city of Los Angeles, we saw reductions in severity and frequency of intimate partner violence. That program cost $12,000 per year per person who was in the program. So for $12,000 a year, we were able to reduce, not total, right? $12,000 per participant, but we were able to reduce severity and frequency of IPV. We've also seen increases in economic well-being. We've seen increases in people's ability to pay rent. And importantly, we've seen increases in health behaviors. So families saying, you know what, now that I have this extra time because I'm no longer working 2 and 3 shifts, I'm gonna reinvest in my health for the future.
So the connection between these cash transfer is not just in isolation, right? These we see the ripple effect of things happening within health. We think about in terms of how people bring them their selves to the space and how they think about the ways in which they can contribute to society. So it's a very different way of just saying, kind of, I'm giving this to this individual, but no, I'm having a larger impact on the entire society, which
exactly,
really
it's a catalyst, right? So one of the things that's the most exciting about guaranteed income is that in all 38 sites where we have worked, we've seen one thing happen over and over and over again. It's that as soon as families are able to meet the immediate needs, and I'm talking within the first 1 to 2 months, they immediately turn around and ask themselves, how can I support my neighbor? How can I support my network? And so it's not just just about that individual, although it is an individual intervention. What we see are people then immediately looking around and building up community. One of the things that was most exciting about our data in LA was we saw a reduction in fear of community violence, which on the one hand sounds a little odd, right? Why would you suddenly be less afraid of community violence because you're getting $1,000 a month? It just came down to relationships.
They knew each other.
When you're working 60, 70 hours a week, you don't know who your neighbors are. Right? So what the cash did in that case, and has done in many other cases, is it catalyzes all of the other efforts that are happening in community, and it gives people the chance to have the time to enroll their kids in enrichment. It gives them the time to wait out those really long waiting lists for housing, for instance, and gave them space to go engage with other nonprofits and other initiatives in the community.
Yeah, thank you. So this is my final question to both of you, and I just want to kind of bring us home. As I think about the work that I've been doing and our team has been doing within the Wharton Coalition of Equity and Opportunity, as we look at, as a research institution, we are trying to think about the wealth gap, and there are particular ways that we're looking at it. We're thinking about health equity, the digital divide, financial literacy, and access. Those are ways in which if we look at that, we can really have an impact on the wealth gap. We can't do that in isolation, right? We need to partner with organizations as we look at the community. We need to think about the government as a way to look at that. And so could you provide the audience maybe with some ways in which you have been doing within the work that you are, the programs that you're a part of those initiatives, and think about these partnerships across these different sectors, and how has that been helpful? How has that driven, maybe, right? We talked about the challenges already, so we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna leave on a positive note. How has it been kind of propelling and thinking about the work, and what's up, what's coming?
Yeah, so a very good friend of mine, Dionisi Alaprintis, a former economist at the Cleveland Fed, completed a paper about a year or two ago that showed the greatest impact that we can have on the black-white wealth gap is not one-time cash transfer. It's consistent earnings. And so creating and crafting a solution that gives black folks, brown folks, historically marginalized folks, the opportunity to consistently gain earnings has the greatest possibility of closing the black-white wealth gap. We saw in years before globalization where you would see the black-white wealth gap begin to shrink or have a slope of a line that we could point towards that, oh, this is going to get better at a certain period of time. But then when we saw globalization and low credential jobs that were high wage that could pay a family sustaining wage went away or were not really available, we saw the wealth gap begin to exacerbate again. So if we can dignify the work that happens at a child care center, if we can dignify the work that happens in the home health aides, our grocery stores and jobs that happen on Main Street, we can see home ownership change. We can see communities change that give power back to people. We can see our citizenry and democracy change in a way that puts people in the position to change those long-term things and those aspirational goals that we have. But it first starts by stabilizing people by way of an earned income.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd like to say is, and I say this a lot, is that you can't budget your way out of poverty. No. Right? So if you're only making $20,000 a year, $14,000 a year, $30,000 a year, there is no magical way that I or you or anyone in this room can teach somebody how to magically make $20,000 a year enough to live off of when you have it. Like, that's kind of silly, right? But for some reason, it seems to be the fixation in philanthropy, even though we have a lot of data to show that we have to actually give people cash in order to give them financial capability. So when I think about where I'd like to see the work to go next is thinking about ways that we can pair this unique intervention of guaranteed income with other things that are known to work well, right? So look at things like IDAs, asset development, gifted savings, the types of programs that allow people to address the wealth gap over time. And so one of the things that I'm most excited about are these new initiatives. Mayor Melvin Carter in St. Paul is doing this right now, where they're pairing a guaranteed income intervention, which addresses income inequality, with asset building, which addresses the wealth gap. So it provides people with stability in the short term by stabilizing their finances, but then it also solves that ambient anxiety of what's gonna happen to me in the future, because it's also giving a pathway for asset development. So thinking, in this way of how do we pair this intervention with other policies and initiatives that are happening, I think is really exciting. And the last thing I'll say about that is one of the most exciting studies that's happening in this way right now is actually in the city of Philadelphia, the PHL Rent Assist program, which is looking to find new ways to make the housing voucher program work a little bit more seamlessly and efficiently by taking some of these lessons from unconditional cash and applying it to HUD.
Well, thank you so much for just sharing a bit more about both of the two programs. I do think this is one way in which we can look at it from a human rights economy. And can we just thank the panelists for sharing their programs as well? We really hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. That's all we have.